Welcome back. This is practice test 2, uh, part 2. We're walking through the test. For this problem, it's a tracing problem. It's as show the sequence of lines executed. Let's look at the code pretty quick. We have some if statements. An if statement says what? If I hit the first statement where I have the condition here, it can be true or false. If it is false, I skip the consequence. Okay? If it is true, I execute the consequence. So line 4 is executed only if line 3 is true. Similarly, line 7 is executed only if line 6 is true. If line 6 is false, then we execute lines 8 and 9. But we must keep track of the value of the variables. So let's get going, and we're going to keep track of the variables. So what's the sequence of statements that we're executing? Here's the sequence. I do 1, and at 1 we set sum to 10. Line 2 we modify sum by adding num to it. So we have a 22. Line 3, oops, be careful. I'm making a mess. I'm not doing this well. Line 1 followed by line 2. Line 3 is an if statement. Is sum greater than 35? Sum is 22. It's not greater than 35, so that's a false. We said line 4 is executed only if line 3 is true. Otherwise, we go to the line after the consequence. Line 4 is what you do if line 3 yields a true. So we don't go to 4 at all, we go to 5. What happens? This means we're going to take sum again, and we're going to do what? We're going to double it. So we're going to say this is 2 times 22 equals 44. And that's line 5. After line 5, we go to line 6. 6 is an if statement. Is sum, which is 44, greater than 35? Yes, so we can say true. Because it's true, we do line number 7. Line 7 says what? It says output 2. After line 7, we do what? Nothing. Line 8 is where you go in case line 6 was a false. Line 9 is what you do when you go to line 8. So the trace ends right here. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. You can enter your answer two ways. Say put a plus sign. 1 plus 2 plus 3f plus 5 plus 6, 2 plus 7. All right? Or I can repeat it and put it without the true and false. I really encourage you to put a true or false because it does two things. It reminds you that you had a decision there, and you're also recording what the outcome was. Oh, 3 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7. It should take it either way. Okay. Number 9. A while loop has two important parts, a condition and a body. What are we saying? We're saying a while loop really looks like while condition a block. Okay. We call this thing a body. Okay. The condition is like a gatekeeper. In order to get to the body, this must be true. All right? Once I'm in the body, I execute the body, then I go to the body and go back up. Go to the body, go back up. So if I leave this loop, I'm always leaving it from the top. All right. So what what governs the repetition of the loop? It's the condition. What about the condition? You repeat the loop only when the condition is true or false. You end the loop when the condition becomes false. All right. This is another trace, isn't it? All right. So let's try that. What have we learned before? If you have a trace, you got to keep track of stuff. Plain and simple. Oh, man. Okay. So what do we need here? Now, when you do these, you really need a piece of paper or something. It's kind of hard to do this in your head, all right? It's hard to do these in your head. And you don't need to be panicking. It's going to take some time, but let's see what we're going to do. We have variables num. When we first get started, we don't know what its value is. And we have a variable sum. We're told for sum, it gets started off with a value of 0. So let's see what the sequence is. We do line 1, then line 2, and then we hit the loop. So the 3 is inside the body of the loop. We read in a number. When we read in the number, we're told the numbers are 4. When we read in the number, this becomes a 4. And we're going to take 4 and add it to the sum. So we're going to take this. I'm doing this wrong. I'm messing up. After 3, we do 4. 4 says take sum and add num to it. So this is 0 plus 4 gives us a 4. And now line 5 says what? It says keep doing this as long as num is not equal to minus 1. What's num? It's a 4. It's not a minus 1, so that becomes true. So 5 is true. 4 is not minus 1. This is a loop, so where do we go? We go back into the body of the loop, which is line 3. What happens at line 3? We read in a new value for num. What's the new value? So minus 1. And we do what? We take sum. Oops. Line. And line 4 does what? Line 4 says add the new number to sum. So sum becomes 4 plus minus 1, which is a 3. And then at line number 5, it says what? It's a decision. Is num not equal to minus 1? What is num? Num is minus 1. So at this point, this becomes false. When this becomes false, the loop ends. I do not go back up to 3 and 4. Instead, I end at 6. What's the output at 6? Output is sum equals whatever sum is. What's the value of sum? 3. Okay? Takes a little bit of time, but do you see what we're doing? Okay? So the sequence of statements, is it clear that as you do the sequence of statements, you got to track the variables because they determine what the sequence of statements is. So you just cannot eyeball this. So what's the trace? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 true plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 false plus 6. Okay? That's the sequence. You cannot memorize these. Don't expect to see this again. Okay. A for statement has parts to it. Doesn't always look like this. Doesn't it look like, it looks like for some variable equals some value, some condition, and some update. Okay. We know for ourselves that this is going to repeat for the value v4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's what we know. So let's break this down. So that there are three parts, and the first two parts are statements. They're statements because they're terminated by the semicolon. The third part tells you how to update the variable. So the form of this is variable equals initial value. This is continuation condition. As long as this is true, the loop repeats. Then we have an update. That's what a for loop looks like. How to get started, how to continue, and how to update. That's what you have here. All right. The update portion is repeated after the body completes. You do the body, then you do the update. So I'll leave that to you. Running out of time again. Good heavens, we're running out of time. We know how to do this loop. I won't dwell on that. What's the output produced by this code? What's the output? Well, let's work it. If num is 8, we have a switch based on 8. Is 8 one of the cases? No. So 8 will take me to the default. What happens at the default? We just output the word wait dash. Then we do a switch based on this other variable k. The value of k is a 1, so we do whatever it says here. Okay? When that is over, the switch is over. What comes after the switch? The output statement. So you see what happens? There's three places you produce output. You produce output here. You produce output here because k is a 1. Produce output here. And you produce output when the switch is over, which is here. Okay, enough said? This is asking the basic question is how do you test if you're inside some interval? Notice that intervals can be open or closed. All right? So if q is less than or equal to 17, it means I'm inside. And therefore, it's got to be one that is closed at the high end. So the only possible choices you have are B and C. What about the lower bound? Does it say greater than or equal to 4? Or does it say greater than 4? It says greater than 4, so therefore it cannot be this one because this includes 4. So the only choice you have is C. Come on, man. Come on. It's getting too long, getting too long. Okay. Several lines contain errors. And um, let me just explain this to you. What happens here? The if statement on line 3, what's the consequence? If you look at it, you might think the consequence is line 4, but it is not line 4 because you mistakenly ended the if statement on line 3 because you ended it with a semicolon. Semicolon said this is the end of this thing. All right? So what happens if we end it here? That means this statement has nothing to do with the if. It's going to always be executed. All right? And this statement for is not part of an if. Therefore, when you see the else, and else only makes sense if the else comes after the consequence, if it comes after what you do, if it's true. But notice that the if statement ended on line 3. If you're going to have an else, the else must be on line 4. So you have a mistake because this else is not attached to an if statement. It can only be attached if the if statement um, is right above it. Okay, so that's a bad choice there, and this is taking way too long. I apologize. Okay, so we got through this. I've explained how some of these work. You really need to pay attention to this and get a handle on how to proceed on the test. Generally, things are not that difficult, but you got to spend some time thinking about this before you take a test. Signing out.